In December 1944, snow fell ceaselessly over the Ardennes forest. The wind swept in waves, scattering layers of ice like thousands of tiny needles. In the leaden grey sky, radar fell silent. The artillery unit's radios carried only the static hiss of interference. Visibility did not exceed 200 meters, and all reconnaissance flights were suspended. According to the 12th Army Group Operations Log, December 1944, the entire aerial observation network of the Western Front was paralyzed within the first 72 hours of the blizzard. Amid that silence, Bastogne was encircled, and in a makeshift wooden hut near Reims, an engineer sat before a block of cold metal, listening to the steady vibration of pistons. A dim yellow oil lamp cast its light over an oil-stained table, where Lieutenant Charles W. Lefever lay out each component of the Stromberg NAS-3A carburetor. He was not a pilot. He once told his comrades, "I only know how to listen to engines." When most engineers had left the camp because of the cold, Lefever remained bent over an old blueprint. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the boards, and bits of snow struck the window frame. On the map, the red lines of German forces had closed around Bastogne, tightening their grip by the hour. If observation fails, artillery dies, Lefever had written in his technical notebook. And now, he was watching that death approach. The L-4 Grasshopper sat outside in the frozen yard. It was a small aluminum frame, so light that a strong gust could tilt its body. Its Continental A65 engine produced 65 horsepower, with a cruising speed of 120 kilometers per hour and an effective range of only 320 kilometers. No armor, no weapons, no navigation equipment. In fact, the L4 was converted from the civilian Piper Q, kite meant for artillery spotting. Yet in the Ardennes, when radar was blind and the sky sealed shut, that fragile aircraft became the only hope of locating German gun positions. In the report of the 9th Air Force Weather Division, December 20, one was recorded as the most critical whiteout of the campaign. All air operations from England to Belgium were halted. Supply convoys could not take off. But Lefever stayed in the hut. He placed his hand on the engine cover, feeling the thick ice clinging as hard as steel. Other mechanics had given up after hours of failed starts. He sat still, listening to the sputter, the throttle needle trembling against his palm, then falling silent again. "If I can fix a truck engine, I can save the sky," he wrote in his diary at 3:47 a.m., his handwriting trembling from the cold. According to the U.S. Army Technical Evaluation, 1946, the L-4's 2, a 65 engine was designed to operate at temperatures between negative 10 degrees Celsius and plus 40 degrees Celsius, but in the Ardennes, the thermometer read negative 18 degrees Celsius. 73-octane fuel was scarce. The entire front had to use 80-octane truck fuel, causing engines to misfire and stall within minutes. Units reported startup success rates below 20%. Lefever understood that if he could not make the Grasshopper take off, American artillery would be firing blind. He dismantled the cylinder cover, warming each metal part by the oil stove. In the dim tent, the weak heat spread slowly, reflected in his weary eyes. The clink of metal against metal echoed like the ticking of a clock. Outside, snow continued to fall, and somewhere amid that white void, German artillery was shifting positions. According to the 101st Airborne Signal Report, the frequency of German shelling at Bastogne increased by 35% during the night of December 2021. Lefever knew that without new coordinates, American guns could only wait to be surrounded. A click rang out as he fitted the final piston. Lefever took a deep breath and pulled the starter crank. The engine whined softly, then fell silent. He tried again and again until an echoing roar filled the small hut. A yellow flame flickered through the vent. The engine began to tremble, steadier, warmer. He tilted his head, listening. Each pulse beat evenly, like a heartbeat. "That's it," he whispered. Outside, the snow had not stopped, but the Grasshopper quivered gently, its tires pressing into the ice. When dawn broke faintly, Lefever stepped outside. The wings of the aircraft were covered with a thin layer of snow, reflecting a pale blue light. The steady hum of the engine carried through the cold air a rhythm of life adrift in a white battlefield. In the distance, German artillery still thundered, but here, in that brief moment, the sky seemed to open its eyes after days of blindness. A witness from the 12th Army Group recalled in a 1946 documentary screening, "He didn't shout, didn't report. He just listened to the engine and knew it was ready. When it started, we all went silent. We knew what it meant." In the theatre, the light from the projector flickered over the wrinkled faces of veterans, cigarette smoke curling above their heads. On the screen, the tiny L-4 trembled amid the white snow, the sound of its engine echoing through black and white frames. A logistics officer from the 9th Army later remarked, "It wasn't just a plane, it was a nerve that reconnected the front. A fragile nerve, binding the entire combat system together. In that moment, there were no cheers, only the sound of an engine starting, an echo that carried farther than any speech. As the L-4 rolled onto the makeshift runway, snow swirled in the propeller's wake. Lefever gripped the control stick tightly, eyes fixed on the white void ahead. No map, no guide, no radar. Only 65 horsepower and faith in his own ears. On the other side of the line, the Germans had no idea that amid the blizzard, an American was about to fly blind to find them. And then, the lightweight plane lifted, tilting across the fog-thick sky. In the post-war record of the Army Air Force's Cold Start archives, 1948, a simple note was added. First successful cold weather flight, modified carburetor by Lieutenant Charles W. Lefever, 22 December 1944. A small line in a technical document, but the beginning of an act that would change the entire course at Bastogne. And in that silence, the Luftwaffe died. When the pine forests of Ardennes sank into white mist, Germany launched its final counterattack. The Battle of the Bulge began on the 16th of December, 1944, mobilizing more than 200,000 soldiers, 1,900 tanks, and 1,000 artillery pieces of the Wehrmacht. According to the War Department Situation Summary, December 1944, this was the largest offensive the US Army had faced since Normandy. Temperatures dropped to -18 degrees Celsius, supply routes were covered in ice, and oil thickened inside barrels. Everything from tanks and towing artillery to radios had to be started by warming them over fire. In such weather, technology was not an ally, it was a traitor. Bastogne, a small town lying at the intersection of the Ardennes transportation network, became a strategic target. As German forces encircled it from 3 directions, American air power was grounded. According to the 9th Air Force Weather Division, all aerial reconnaissance operations were suspended for 96 consecutive hours. Artillery units in Bastogne had no means to correct their fire. 105 mm and 155 mm shells fell off target, carving white craters across the snow. An artillery officer wrote in his battlefield diary, "We heard the explosions, but we didn't know if they did anything. Everything disappeared into the fog." In the US artillery system, every strike depended on flying eyes observation pilots in L-4 Grasshopper aircraft, sending corrected coordinates via SCR 610 radio. But that very device, weighing 12 kilograms, became a burden in winter. As temperatures plunged, dry cell batteries froze, antennas snapped, and rubber tubes stiffened. According to the US Army Signal Equipment Report, 1945, the SCR 610 radio operated reliably only down to -10 degrees Celsius. Below that, its signal became entirely distorted. From the command center, maps gradually emptied, and contact markers vanished like stars erased from the sky. In that situation, an old doctrine remained in use. Artillery could rely on topographic maps and estimation to fire, even without observers. This doctrine originated from the Italian campaign, where the weather was dry and visibility was clear. But in Ardennes, snow buried every landmark, rendering all coordinates meaningless. According to the 1st Army Tactical Review, January 1945, More than 60% of American firepower during the first week of the battle fell into blind fire zones, targetless areas without visual confirmation. Ammunition was consumed rapidly, but real effectiveness dropped by over 70%. The silence of the sky became Germany's weapon. Inside the Bastogne command bunker, General Anthony McAuliffe, later famous for his reply, "Nuts," faced a grim reality. He had guns, shells, and men, but no eyes. When reconnaissance planes could not take off, the artillery was like a blind man wielding a knife. A line in the 12th Army Group communication log, December 1944, reads, "No observer report in 36 hours. Artillery battalions 420, 422, 428 ceasefire due to unconfirmed trajectories." The next message, written in purple ink, contained a short note, "Request aerial observation, none available." At the front line, gunners had to guess target directions based on the echo of German fire. They measured the delay between explosion and echo to estimate distance, then transmitted it via handheld radio. The margin of error could reach 800 meters, enough for a shell burst to land dangerously close to friendly positions. Survivors later said they often stopped firing for fear of hitting their own. "It was like fighting blind," recalled a gunner of the 101st Airborne in a 1947 interview. As the Germans pushed deeper, Panzer IV self-propelled guns shelled supply roads, cutting communications completely. The Corps Logistics Office recorded that 47% of available radios lost contact, mostly due to frozen batteries. In the 9th Army report, the phrase "communication blackout" appeared more than 20 times within 2 days. It was the period when the entire American tactical network relied solely on word of mouth, passed hand to hand through field stations. The cold did not only kill men, it killed sound. Wires stiffened, loudspeakers cracked, artillery echoes carried farther than usual, but human voices faded. In an archival film by the Army Pictorial Service, images showed soldiers sitting around a fire, surrounded by white smoke, all staring toward the sky, where not a single plane remained. The reporter narrated, "It was the quietest battlefield in Europe. And in that silence, what had once been America's advantage, technology, systems, and firepower, suddenly became useless. The Ardennes cared nothing for engineering. It swallowed every signal, every plan. The commanders called it the day the sky went silent. For Lefever, sitting quietly in a wooden hut in Reims, it was the day he understood that if the sky could no longer speak, someone had to teach it how to speak again. Before moving on to the next part, if this story resonates with you, please like and share so more people can see it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your words inspire us to make even better videos. Charles W. Lefever was born in 1914 inches Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in a town where the sound of metal was the rhythm of life. His father was a lathe operator in a small workshop that repaired agricultural tractors, and it was there that Lefever spent the first 10 years of his life surrounded by grease and the clanging of hammers. He learned to diagnose mechanical faults by ear, to gauge pressure from the rhythm of pistons, and to feel the vibration of a crankshaft through his fingertips. When asked after the war about the origin of his skill, he simply said, "I grew up in the sound of machines. It taught me to listen more than to speak." According to the enlistment record of the U.S. Army Personnel Record, 1942, Lefever joined the Army without an engineering degree, holding only a certificate in practical mechanics. Yet within the military, he quickly became the man technicians sought when engines overheated, valves jammed, or spark plugs misfired. A friend once said that Lefever had the hands of a doctor, but the heart of a musician. He believed that every machine had its own heartbeat, and that the duty of an engineer was to keep it beating in rhythm. When the war spread across Europe, Lefever was assigned to the headquarters of the 12th Army Group in Reims as chief technician of the Artillery Reconnaissance Unit. His task was to maintain the L-4 Grasshopper, a light reconnaissance aircraft with a steel tube frame covered in fabric, weighing only 360 kilograms. It was designed to fly low, slow, and land easily. To Lefever, the L-4 was an honest machine. If the pilot understood it, it would obey, mistreat it, and it would betray you in mid-air. In the army, artillerymen often called the L-4 the Maytag Messerschmitt, a joke implying that the tiny plane was nothing more than a flying washing machine. Young pilots feared flying it more than facing the enemy. In strong winds, it shook violently, its Continental A-65 engine producing a deep, stuttering hum like a cough in winter. Lefever never argued. He simply noted every vibration in his notebook, from spark plug temperature to throttle lag. One page of that notebook recorded: vibration, 90, 2 revolutions per minute, deviation after 40 minutes, normal under cold pressure. He often tested engines in the early morning hours, when no one else in camp was awake. People said he would press his ear against the engine's body, eyes closed, listening like a luthier tuning strings. One day, a comrade teased, "What do you hear in there, Lefever?" He replied, "Fear. The machine knows when you don't trust it." The remark drew laughter, but for Lefever, it was a working philosophy. By late 1944, as the Ardennes sank into blizzards, his unit was nearly cut off. Radio contact was intermittent, and artillery fire was guided by guesswork. An officer's entry in the 12th Army Group communication log, December 1944, read, "No contact with aerial observer. Batteries firing blind for 48 hours. Amid the chaos, Lefever did not wait for orders. He looked at the ice-covered L-4 and thought that if no one else could fly, perhaps he should be the one to try first. According to the recollection of a fellow crew chief, Lefever entered the maintenance shed carrying a small can of oil and a worn notebook. He knew that 73-octane aviation fuel was exhausted. The camp had only a few remaining cans of 80-octane truck gasoline, a crude, impure fuel that could easily damage pistons. But Lefever knew better than anyone that the problem was not the fuel itself, it was how the engine digested it. Under the oil lamp's light, he disassembled the Stromberg NAS-3A carburetor. Each screw was placed neatly on an oilcloth, arranged as precisely as an orchestra's score. He replaced the fuel jet with 10, 4 millimeters larger in diameter, to enrich the mixture and help the gasoline ignite in the freezing air. Then he inserted a thin steel shim between the cylinder head and block, reducing the compression ratio from 6:3 to 1:5, 9:1 to prevent pre-ignition. According to the U.S. Army Technical Review 1946, this was the first recorded modification that allowed the A-65 engine to start reliably in temperatures below -15 degrees Celsius. When asked why he dared to alter an aircraft on his own, Lefever answered, "Because I know it will die if it can't breathe right." To him, an engine was a living being, and the engineer's role was to bring it back to life. No manual taught how to do that in a blizzard, but he had ears sensitive enough to hear every small deviation in the machine's breath. In the 3rd Army Air Support Summary, January 1945, Lefever was briefly noted as responsible for emergency carburetor modification under field conditions. No one knew that behind that dry line were 3 sleepless nights, fingers bloodied, eyes red from oil smoke. He sat in the shed, arms wrapped around the engine block, listening to the metal expand in the heat, waiting for the moment when the sound became even. On the morning of December 22, he stepped out of the shed and looked at the small grasshopper waiting before him. The sun hid behind the clouds, snow reflecting a dim light. Lefever knew there was only one way to test if he had been right, to take off. It was said that before climbing into the cockpit, he placed his hand on the fuselage and whispered, "Now listen to me." End. That sentence appeared in no official report, but a nearby mechanic recalled in a 1947 interview, "I saw him listening to the plane as if the two were talking." And perhaps it was that very moment that made the difference. Lefever did not listen to orders. He listened to the sky. When the A-65 engine roared to life, the others in the shed looked up. The sound carried through the fog like an affirmation. According to the 12th Army Group Engineering Log, December 1944, the first test flight after 4 days of suspension was recorded at 7:12 local time, with the simple note, Lefever, test flight, engine modified. From that moment, the war was no longer a matter of machines. It became the story of a man who could hear the sky. The morning in Reims was still thick with fog, snow covering everything in a layer of ice as clear as glass. Inside the maintenance hut, Lieutenant Charles W. Lefever wrapped an old blanket around his neck, bending over the Continental A65 engine. On the table stood 3 opaque fuel cans labelled Motor Fuel 80. It was truck gasoline, a type of fuel that, according to the Army Ordnance Bulletin, December 1944, was authorized only for ground vehicles. The 73-octane aviation fuel was completely depleted, and the entire L-4 squadron had been forced to ground. Lefever understood that unless he could find a way to make this crude gasoline burn steadily, the entire artillery reconnaissance network would be paralyzed. The A65 engine, a horizontally opposed 4-cylinder producing 65 horsepower, was designed to run on light, evenly burning fuel that maintained stable pressure at 2,300 revolutions per minute. But when filled with truck gasoline, the injectors clogged with carbon deposits, the spark plugs darkened with soot, and the engine sputtered like a cough. The 80-octane fuel had a lower anti-knock rating, so at -18 degrees Celsius, the air-fuel mixture became too lean, lacking the heat needed for continuous combustion. According to the U.S. Army Technical Review, 1946, the rate of engine failure in wartime substitute fuel tests reached 83%. But Lefever had no other choice. He decided to intervene deep in the heart of the machine. Under the oil lamp's light, he dismantled the Stromberg NAS-3, a carburetor, a small metal block the size of a hand, yet the very heart of the engine's life. Using a mechanical drill, he widened the injector nozzle by 0.4 millimeters, enriching the air-fuel mixture for easier ignition in the freezing air. Then, he added a thin steel shim to the cylinder head, lowering the compression ratio from 3:1 to 5:9 to prevent premature detonation, the main cause of piston failure. A note in the 12th Army Group Engineering Log, December 1944, described, Lefever adjusted compression ratio manually, result, steady ignition at -15 Celsius. Once the mechanical tuning was complete, Lefever faced a greater enemy, the cold itself. At extremely low temperatures, moisture in the intake manifold crystallized, forming ice on the air filter that suffocated the engine within minutes of startup. Other engineers had tried burning fires beneath the aircraft, but the heat was too intense, damaging the fabric fuselage. Lefever chose another method. He harnessed the exhaust heat from a nearby GMC truck. He connected a rubber hose, directing the hot airflow into the engine's intake chamber, maintaining a steady temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. According to Field Maintenance Report number 214, this improvised system reduced air filter icing rates to 5%, an unprecedented achievement. For 3 consecutive days, he repeated the cycle of testing and adjustment. Each time the engine stalled, he opened the cylinder head, adjusted the throttle screw, and recorded his observations meticulously in a notebook. As the air filled with thick gasoline vapor, he took a deep breath and murmured, "The engine still doesn't listen to me." On the 3rd night, he placed a thermometer under the wing. The reading held steady at 23 degrees Celsius, the engine vibrating softly, no longer stuttering. The oil lamp cast its glow over his sleepless red eyes, and at that moment the rhythm of the pistons thumped evenly like a heartbeat. A comrade entered, heard the crisp roar, and exclaimed, "It's alive!" Lefever said nothing, simply nodded, and placed his hand on the cowling to feel the tremors. According to the U.S. Army Test Memorandum, January 1945, Lefever's A65 engine ran continuously for 15 minutes without stalling on truck fuel, the first instance under sub-zero conditions below -15 degrees Celsius. The result far exceeded the previously defined technical limits. But for Lefever, success did not stop at getting the engine to run. It had to fly, meaning it needed to sustain over 60 horsepower throughout takeoff. He readjusted the air mixture, and increased intake pressure by extending the intake manifold to exploit air inertia. In field conditions, without calibrated instruments, he relied on sound to gauge engine speed. According to the 12th Army Group field log, the 22nd of December 1944, he wrote, "Engine holds sound at constant low frequency, estimated 2,300 revolutions per minute, steady, acceptable for takeoff." After 17 hours of continuous testing, Lefever shut down the engine, removed his gloves, and sat on the cold floor. The smell of burnt oil mixed with the dampness of snow. Around him lay worn metal fragments. He looked at the L-4 Grasshopper, knowing it was ready not powered by proper fuel or new parts, but by what he called mechanical faith. When asked after the war, Lefever said, "I didn't invent, I just taught the airplane how to breathe in winter." That sentence was later quoted in the NACA Cold Start archives, 1948, as a note accompanying a report on cold weather engine start capability. From the Reims outpost, his idea spread to other bases. Young engineers followed Lefever's notes, connecting exhaust pipes to the wings, wrapping the engine cowling in oilcloth, and trying again to start engines in the snow. The next morning, Lefever stepped outside. The Ardennes sky remained a white void, but the A-65's roar was different, full, deep, and steady. According to a note in the Army Aviation Engineering log, the 23rd of December 1944, the engine test entry was stamped operational. From that line of ink, a small aircraft returned to the sky powered by the very fuel everyone thought impossible. And that morning, the sound of an engine cut through the fog like a heartbeat returning to a frozen world. The sky over the Ardennes on the 22nd of December 1944 was as dense as cooled ash. Snow lay 40 centimeters thick, an east wind whipped at 45 kilometers per hour, and visibility was barely 150 meters. In the logbook of the 12th Army Group Engineering log, a simple note read, "Lintus CW, Lefever, single flight, observation mission, Reims sector." No one knew it was the journey of one man alone. No communication, no comrades, just an engineer who gave himself permission to take off and give eyes back to the artillery. The L-4 Grasshopper rolled out of the shed like a bird with a broken wing. Its Continental A-65 engine, after 17 hours of adjustment, groaned beneath a shell of ice. Wind swept across the wings, flinging sheets of snow into the air. Lefever eased the throttle, listening as the engine rose and steadied at 2,300 revolutions per minute. He knew he had less than 40 minutes of fuel, and if he flew off course, he would never return. According to the U.S. Army Air Operations Summary, 1945, this was the only flight ever launched under weather conditions, officially rated as zero visibility. The moment the plane's wheels lifted off the ground, snow closed around him like white walls. Lefever lowered his altitude to 200 feet, flying parallel to the forest ridges, using the echoes of the engine to navigate. In his personal notes, he wrote, "I saw nothing, only heard the hills echo." The 65 horsepower hum bounced off the slopes, producing a delayed echo of a few seconds, just enough for him to sense the distance. Each subtle tremor, every variation in tone, became a map inside his mind. According to the 9th Air Force Meteorological Bulletin, the cloud layer over the Reims, Bastogne sector was 1,200 meters thick, causing all radio signals to scatter in false directions. Lefever carried an SCR 610 radio, but the frequency was drowned in static. The indicator light flickered weakly. He decided to switch it off completely, listening instead to the wind as his only compass. When he crossed the Meuse River, the wind shifted, and the engine's tone dulled a sign he was over dense forest. He adjusted the ailerons, banking slightly northwest, holding course at about 320 degrees. Inside the cockpit, his breath condensed into mist, and the glass clouded over minute by minute. Below him stretched a colourless world. Snow blanketed the battlefield, turning everything into a flat expanse. For the first 23 minutes, Lefever saw nothing but white void and faint black dots. Then suddenly, he heard another sound blend into the engine's hum, a deep, prolonged boom that echoed back from the southeast. He knew it was German artillery. The sound delay told him the range, roughly 3,200 meters, the position 100 feet lower than his current altitude. He jotted coordinates into his notebook, estimating them from the map he had memorized, the southeastern sector of Bastogne, near the road to Longvilly. According to the 12th Army Group communication log, December 1944, Lefever transmitted the signal through an improvised channel, code named Red Smoke 12.31, marking the location of enemy artillery. The code was decoded at Bastogne headquarters within 6 minutes. Upon receiving the signal, the 420th Field Artillery Command adjusted the firing angle of its 155mm long tom guns toward the southeast. The first 3 salvos exploded at a range of 4,100 meters. After correction using Lefever's coordinates, the subsequent volleys struck precisely. According to the War Department Ordnance Review 1945, 3 German batteries were destroyed within 18 minutes, reopening a temporary communication corridor for American forces. A staff officer wrote in his report, "The observation restored by single flight enabled effective artillery fire for the first time in 4 days." In the air, Lefever did not know the outcome immediately. He only heard the distant thunder of explosions, then saw black smoke rising amid the white snow. He circled once more, confirming that the smoke columns matched the coordinates he had sent. In the cockpit, the fuel gauge showed 1/4 remaining. He turned the nose toward Reims, following the wind's echo as on the way out, feeling as if he were swimming through a sea of snow. On landing, the front wheel skidded nearly 60 meters across the ice, but the airframe remained intact. Lefever stepped out, holding his notebook, his face covered in frost. A witness recalled in the 12th Army Group Oral History Project 1946, "We saw him step out, expressionless, but his hands were shaking from the cold. He said, 'They're at Longvilly. It's done.'" No one understood the full meaning of that sentence until Bastogne reported the German guns had gone silent. When the news reached headquarters, Lefever was not mentioned in any victory communiqué. He simply wrote one line in his technical log, "Flight time 46 minutes, mission complete, engine stable." In that blizzard, the engineer had become the only pilot who could make the sky speak again. After the war, a copy of the diary was preserved in the Army Air Force's Cold Start archives. On the final page, Lefever's handwriting remained clear. "I flew blind, but the sky listened." Those words sit beside a blurred photograph of the L-4 flying low over a white forest, a testament to a flight that should never have taken off, but changed the course of the battle for Bastogne. And from that silence, the war found its voice again. News of Lieutenant Charles W. Lefever's flight spread faster than the sound of artillery. Within hours of Bastogne's coordinates being updated, American artillery regained its precision rhythm. According to the War Department Ordnance Review 1945, the combat efficiency of artillery units in the area increased by 30% within 24 hours after observation signals returned. Commanders described the phenomenon as the sky opening its eyes. The 155mm long tom guns struck targets with an average deviation of only 65 meters, compared to more than 200 meters before. Bastogne, the focal point of the German offensive, held out thanks to the first set of coordinates provided by Lefever. As headquarters compiled reports, one fact became undeniable: the effectiveness of the aerial reconnaissance system could determine the entire front's outcome. According to 12th Army Group Tactical Bulletin, January 1945, Lefever's method, the procedure for engine adjustment and exhaust heat redirection, was urgently disseminated to all L4 and L5 maintenance units. Within 10 days, more than 1,500 reconnaissance flights per week were restored across the Western Front. One of the engineers later recalled, "We just copied what Lefever did in Reims, and suddenly the planes came back to life." The results spread quickly. In Belgium, pilots of 3 Corps reported that successful engine startups in sub-zero conditions increased from 18% to 76% after applying the exhaust heat diversion system. In the Netherlands, L-5 Sentinel units using the same technique reduced engine failure rates during flights below -12 degrees Celsius to under 10%. According to Field Maintenance Statistics, February 1945, technical malfunctions during startup dropped by over 60%. In a battlefield where every detail could decide a life, those numbers meant hundreds of pilots and observers survived to deliver artillery data. The Third Army Air Support Review, March 1945, explicitly stated, "The Lefever modification contributed to maintaining uninterrupted aerial reconnaissance under zero visibility conditions." The phrase zero visibility became an official term in tactical documentation. With this capability, the American reconnaissance system not only operated in harsh weather, but also gained an advantage when the Germans believed the opposing air force was grounded. Each time a grasshopper appeared in a snowstorm, the Germans thought it was an illusion, but it was, in fact, the artillery's eyes watching them. The strategic effect was most evident at Bastogne, when the Germans deployed Kampfgruppe Paper, their elite armoured force, from the east. Real-time reports from L-4 aircraft allowed American artillery to destroy 12 Panther tanks and 5 self-propelled guns in just 2 days. According to 101st Airborne After Action Report, December 1944, those precise coordinates matched the reconnaissance data from Lefever's modified aircraft. The event was described as the artillery comeback. Bastogne held firm, and within 2 weeks, German forces were stopped across the entire Western Front, but the impact extended beyond the battlefield. In the 1945 meetings of the U.S. War Department, copies of Lefever's technical report were sent to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA. According to NACA Technical Archive 1948, the anti-icing design and fuel ratio Lefever proposed became the foundation for the cold start engine project tested at Langley Field. The principles born in the wooden hut at Reims evolved into technical standards for training aircraft in Northern Europe. Even into the early 1950 seconds in the Arctic flight training program, a section of the heated starting system was annotated as derived from Lefever Field Model 1944. From a strategic perspective, Lefever's flight reshaped how industrial warfare was understood. It proved that breakthroughs didn't always come from massive production lines sometimes. A screwdriver and a mechanic's mind could change the course of war. According to U.S. Army Historical Summary 1946, maintaining continuous reconnaissance during the winter of 1944 helped the Allies hold Bastogne, the key crossroads, preventing the Germans from splitting the front. Had the town fallen, the entire supply route from Antwerp to Luxembourg would have been cut, and Patton's counter-offensive in the south could not have launched on time. The moral impact was just as powerful. After Bastogne, L-4 pilots began painting the phrase "Lefever set inside" on their aircraft noses, a symbol of adaptability. A letter from Colonel Robert Leich to headquarters in February 1945 read, "We don't fly with engines anymore. We fly with his idea." That line spread through reconnaissance units as a quiet tribute. In war, every victory has its cost, but sometimes that cost is simply the right idea at the right time. Bastogne stood, the Western Front remained unbroken, and Germany lost its final chance to counterattack. The 40-day Ardennes campaign, which claimed more than 19,000 American lives, might have ended differently had Lefever not taught the Grasshopper how to live in the cold. When the war ended, Europe's map was redrawn with new borders, but in a small corner of Reims, there remained the faint trace of the airplane that once flew through that snowstorm. A flight lasting 4-6 minutes, an idea that changed the course of the war. And somewhere in the archives, the echo of that engine still hums proof that sometimes victory begins with the sound of a machine that refused to die. When the war ended, the name of Lieutenant Charles W. Lefever vanished from the after-action bulletins. In the War Department summary, 1946, there was not a single line crediting him, though the technical report Field Modification Report, 1946, 945, still listed a small annotation. Engine adjustment, cold condition, Lieutenant Tem ZW Lefever, 12th Army Group. That line sat buried among hundreds of figures like a breath lost in the noise of victory. In the meetings recounting acts of heroism, they spoke of Bastogne, of Macauliffe, of Patton, but no one mentioned the man who had reopened the sky's eyes on that winter night. Yet among the pilots of Reims and the Rhine, Lefever's story lived on quietly. They carved the words, "Lefever set inside," onto the noses of their L-4 aircraft with knives, with nails, even with shrapnel. It was not an official emblem but their way of saying thank you. A report from the Army Air Communications Division, 1,945 recorded. Over 200 aircraft bearing unofficial marking "Lefever set inside" observed across 12th Army Group. It was the private language of survivors for the man who had turned engineering into lifeblood. After the war, Lefever returned to the United States, left the Army, and was invited to serve as a technical consultant at NACA, the forerunner of NASA. At Langley Field, he joined the Cold Start System Research Group, which tested engine ignition under temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius. According to NACA Technical Bulletin 1948, his adjustments to compression ratios and heat conduction were integrated into flight training models used in Northern Europe. Lefever spoke little in meetings, always sitting in the back row, but each time an engine started smoothly in the cold, he smiled. People said he still kept the old stopwatch that had accompanied him on his Ardennes flight, its glass scratched, its hands frozen at 46 minutes, the duration of the blind flight in 1944. A reporter from the Richmond Times once found him in 1950, asking why he had risked taking off alone in a blizzard. Lefever replied softly, "Not to fly, but so the men on the ground could live one more day." That answer was later quoted in Eyes of Artillery, Legacy and Transition, as proof that war was not only written by battles, but also by the quiet resolve of those who understood the worth of every breath. In the NACA archives, there remains a photograph of Lefever standing beside a weathered L-4. He looks straight into the lens, the light illuminating half his face while the other half fades into shadow. Behind him, the aircraft's wing still bears the faint engraving, "Lefever set inside," its letters fading with time. That image was later used in NASA's training materials for many years, a humble emblem of courage found in silence. And in that silence, the world kept flying. When the guns at Bastogne fell silent and the snow began to melt, the sky opened again, pale blue and calm, as if no storm had ever passed. In the archives of the U.S. Army Historical Division, 1946, a simple note appears. Observation restored. The 22nd of December 1944. Just 4 words, but behind them lies the story of a man who taught an entire battlefield how to see again. War often celebrates generals and great battles, yet among those names are the quiet hands of unknown craftsmen who made the difference. Lefever did not write theory. He simply did what he understood kept a machine breathing, so that others might live. Ardennes, that December, was cold enough for steel to crack at a touch, for gasoline to freeze into white frost, and for breath to turn into vapour. The thermometer in Reims read -18 degrees Celsius, a small number but one capable of paralysing an entire campaign. Yet amid that sub-zero silence, one mechanic created the only warmth that mattered intellect. According to the 12th Army Group Technical Debrief, 1945, thanks to Lefever's adjustments, more than 1,500 reconnaissance flights per week were maintained throughout the winter, ensuring American artillery never went blind again. Those dry figures, standing alone, are just data, but beside the image of a lone engineer sitting by an oil lamp, we understand that intelligence doesn't always wear a uniform. War teaches many things, among them the truth that technology is not born only in brightly lit laboratories. Sometimes it begins in a cold hut, deep in a white night, when a trembling hand still turns the last screw. Lefever's innovation did not bear the grandeur of a great invention. It was a fusion of survival and faith, of intuition and science. And perhaps, because it was born from necessity, it carried the most enduring power of all the power of humanity. In the 1951 documentary, Eyes of Artillery, Legacy and Transition, a Bastogne veteran spoke through the static of an old recording. We didn't know who he was, but every time we heard the L4's engine, we knew someone was seeing for us. That sound, amid thousands of explosions, became a kind of faith. The weak hum of that engine was a promise that the artillery would not fire blind, that even when the sky was blind, someone still saw. The image of Lefever sitting quietly before the engine, the yellow light reflecting off the oil, became a symbol that transcended the boundaries of engineering. From Ardennes to Langley, from battlefield to laboratory, his story reminded the world that science and humanity are never separate. You can measure an engine's power in horsepower, but you can never measure the strength of will. When NACA tested the cold start system in 1948, they quoted Lefever's words in the appendix: "Precision is just another form of courage." For him, precision was not a number, it was the courage to try again when everything else had failed. Today, in the Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, a model of the L-4 Grasshopper sits encased in glass. On its fuselage, the faded white letters, Lefever set inside, remain. Under the lights, it looks small, fragile even, but the guide always tells visitors, "This aircraft once changed the Battle of the Ardennes." Perhaps that is no exaggeration, for in those moments when the sky was sealed shut, it was one ordinary man who opened the world once more. If this story makes you believe that intellect and courage can exist even in moments that seem impossible, leave a follow, share your thoughts. Every small click, every comment, helps keep alive the memory of people like Lefever, those who did not seek victory, but created hope. On the final frame of the documentary, the A65 engine hums one last time, steady, warm, real. A small sound in the ocean of history, yet enough to remind us that across all layers of time, the light of human intellect can still pierce the fog. And that, beyond visibility, is where history still breathes. Have you ever lived through days of war that felt endless? Nights when the roar of artillery drowned out breath, and a small light in the distance made people believe tomorrow would still come. If this story brings back a memory, a person, a moment you once witnessed in those years, share it in the comments. Each story you tell is a fragment that keeps history from fading. A single follow, a single like, may seem small, but it is how we preserve the memory of people like Lieutenant Charles W. Lefever, those who quietly changed the world with their hands, their courage, and their simple belief that, as long as the machine can breathe, humanity can live. Support us, so that stories like this will continue to be told, to be heard, and to be remembered across time, across memory, and in the hearts of those who still believe that humankind always has a reason to keep flying.